Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Extraordinary developments in Formula 1 today, with rumours emerging that Red Bull's decline from the start of the season to now has more to it than initially meets the eye, with sources suggesting that parts of Red Bull's car were deemed illegal behind the scenes by the F1's governing body, and they were asked to remove said elements they were using on their RB20. That has resulted in what we have seen over the last few rounds, from a nigh on 1 second a lap pace advantage back in China to what we are seeing today, with even Max Verstappen struggling for race victories. If this turns out to be true, what are the implications for what happened at the start of the season for this year's championship and potentially the last 2 years of Red Bull domination? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. But before we get to the Red Bull stuff, Binotto is back in Formula 1 after stepping away, getting fired by Ferrari, and Fred Vasseur took over. They've effectively swapped places in some sense, because Binotto is now going to Sauber, where of course Vasseur previously was. Now it isn't going to be Sauber for long, it's soon going to be Audi. But this is quite fascinating what's happened behind the scenes, because Andreas Seidel, good connections with Audi previously, was of course at McLaren for a couple of years, went to effectively oversee the transition from Audi Sauber, or from Sauber into becoming Audi. He's been fired. There's some sort of power struggle, it seems, behind the scenes here, and it seems like Andreas Seidel's been played like a fiddle, really, because Oliver Hoffmann and Andreas Seidel are gone, and Mattia Binotto is coming in. Makes you wonder as well whether the trajectory and the progress of that Audi team were really looking especially good, because if it was, you'd imagine this may not have happened. But Seidel is paying the price for something, and he's out of there, right? Some sort of power struggle occurred, and it's Mattia Binotto joining as the new Chief Operations and Chief Technical Officer of their Formula 1 project. So Binotto back in the sport. Whether this is a role suited for Binotto, there's questions on that. I don't think he made the best team principal, but he's certainly a good engineer and understands on some level how to run a decently successful organisation. I mean, obviously Ferrari made a good car in 2022, didn't really happen so much last year, but even Vasseur and all the positives we've spoken about him is struggling to get on top of what Ferrari are currently going through. Mike Crack as well, there's been some rumours that his time as team principal over at Aston Martin might be coming to a close relatively soon, and if that's true, he apparently could join Audi in the near future. But Binotto is back in the sport, and excited to see how he gets on really with Audi. I know there's been some questions as well whether this could move Carlos Sainz at all, just because of the relationship that he's had with Binotto, and Sainz of course still being a consideration on the books of Audi, and therefore maybe Binotto's return to Audi, or just move to Audi in general, might make Sainz think twice about where exactly he goes, because the Red Bull situation, the McLaren or the Mercedes situation, certainly not McLaren situation, leaves some questions in the air right now around where Sainz is actually still going to end up moving to. Very uncertain as it stands, but looks like after some sort of drama behind the scenes, Binotto's also on the hunt for other Ferrari employees. So there could be quite a few things happening behind the scenes at Audi in the relatively near future, but some surprising drama hitting the timeline today on that one. Few other updates around the world of Formula 1. Yuki Tsunoda's crash in qualifying, which was a pretty big crash, but it wasn't anything insane, right? Like, he seemed to be okay. He had a couple of minor injuries, but he was okay for the race on Sunday. That was actually a 68G impact that he suffered. I'm guessing when he initially hit the curb and flew up into the air, maybe when he hit the ground after that. Obviously for a very brief period of time, but still, that is some of the highest G-force numbers that we have ever seen in Formula 1. Like the Max Verstappen crash at Silverstone was 51G, I believe. Grosjean's crash at Bahrain was 67G. So, maybe the absolute peak number is maybe not the most important thing when it comes to the impact that a crash can have, but still kind of remarkable to see how this one went, and, thankfully for all the great new safety features in Formula 1, because otherwise we would have had far more casualties, it must be said, over the last few years in this sport. An update on Alpine as well. Sources say the Mercedes thing is basically going to happen now, and it's the first time that they'll be linked up since 2015, when the Enstone team were previously called Lotus, but it does seem like Alpine are going to pull the trigger on buying Mercedes engines in 2026 and beyond. It does raise some questions on McLaren, because there were rumours that if Mercedes decided to supply another team, because of course they're losing Aston Martin to Honda, so Mercedes would be supplying themselves, McLaren and of course Williams, come 2026. There was some talk that Zach Brown thinks do they really want to be supplying, 8 engines to make in 2026 with a brand new set of regulations is quite a tall order, maybe, and therefore McLaren have thought about maybe even using Red Bull powertrains instead. So there's been some debate on that. I don't think McLaren will do that. I think they're more than likely going to stick with Mercedes, but there is some talk that potentially that could overstretch Mercedes to some degree. They seem happy with it though, and Alpine, pretty funny, isn't it, how Alpine, this French excellent team, which is going to have a base in the UK and is going to be running on German engines and potentially German gearboxes and suspension as well, British, German, whatever you want to say, you get the picture, that this could be a pretty all-encompassing deal. Does that make Alpine a more competitive prospect? Probably yes, let's be honest, but does it seem frankly awful for Renault and Alpine that they can't even use their own engines because they just have no confidence they're going to make a good one? It ain't exactly a good look, is it? But it probably makes Alpine more attractive to the likes of Carlos Sainz than it previously was, if of course this comes true. But let's talk about what happened in Hungary, because Sergio Perez had a decent recovery drive. You can maybe put that down to the fact that he does tend to prefer a more understeery car than Verstappen does, a car that's a little bit more compliant, but let's say more stable, but isn't necessarily as sharp on the turn-in that Verstappen likes. Seemed like the new upgrade. Perez didn't seem to mind it. Obviously, his qualifying wasn't good again, but he made some decent progress in the race. Verstappen, on the other hand, was further up front, but had a real stinking race, to be honest. There were multiple moments he was obviously getting very frustrated over the radio, and there's been lots of talk as to how exactly Red Bull have fallen from a position where it looks like they were going to effectively replicate last season to now both championships are very much still alive. They are not the favourites, I would say, anymore, Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. Max is still heavy favourite in the Drivers, although some may make the argument on what we're going to discuss over the coming minutes that many of the points that Max accrued at the start of the season are not necessarily fully deserved, as we shall get into. Fred Vasseur's talking about Ferrari, the fact that last year they were miles behind Red Bull at this track last year, and this weekend they're only 20 seconds behind the leader because Red Bull and Max won last year's Hungarian Grand Prix by over 30 seconds. It was like the most dominant gap that we've ever seen in recent times in Formula 1. This year, though, very different story. McLaren actually, in the last 12 months, recovered 0.8 of a second. And that's a McLaren that were good at last year's Grand Prix, right? They scored a podium last year with Lando Norris at last year's Grand Prix, but McLaren were 0.8 quicker compared to Red Bull than they were, 12 months ago. But actually, a lot of that is down to the fact that Red Bull actually got slower. And this is what will make people really think about what we are about to discuss, is this reality, because this is race pace 2024 to 2023. Ferrari was 0.7 faster than they were last year. McLaren was 0.6 faster than they were last year. Racing Bulls half a second, Haas half a second, Mercedes 0.4, Williams and Aston were pretty similar, Sauber not great, but Red Bull, they got slower this year to last year. They were 0.2 of a second a lap slower, and sure, last year Max was, clean air, no traffic, no battling, stuff like this, so maybe, understandable that it's going to be more difficult in those circumstances, but still, the Red Bull was literally a slower car this year than it was last year, which is unprecedented, given, especially where they were at the start of the season, but also the amount of progress that every other team has made. This then was a quote that came out of Antonio Lobato during the weekends that implies that there is something fishy going on. Just quickly, this is Antonio Lobato, Spanish television presenter, pundit, well liked and respected, it seems, certainly in that side of the world, and, commentator on the sport, pundit for the sport. If he says something, you're going to hear it as, okay, let's at least pay attention. Might not be true necessarily, but look, he's a contributor from a journalistic perspective as well. So let's just listen what he had to say. Okay, obviously this is translated from the Spanish, but what he said was the following. I was told from 2 different teams that they are convinced that the FIA told Red Bull to change some parts. The drop in performance is because the team found something illegal, and he says yes, the FIA confirmed it and told them to retire it. That is the rumour. And I'll be honest that I heard rumours about this, months ago, that there was some speculation that in the paddock there were some questions behind the scenes as to whether that Red Bull car is totally legal, shall we say. And there's now speculation coming up publicly that rumours have it, in the paddock at least, that the FIA, the governing body, looked at the RB20 and told them, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, you got to change some parts. And effectively, the implication is that car was illegal for the start of the season. Does that imply cheating? I don't know. That's another question entirely. But the belief is, at least by some, that the car that they currently have is maybe the legal version of the car that they had at the start of the season. And therefore it raises questions as to last year's car, the car the year before that, and all sorts of other stuff. And in terms of this actual championship fight in the first place, I just wanted to look at really whether there's evidence for this in terms of pace. Because I'm not going to lie, when you look at the season so far, it is incredibly striking how much Red Bull have declined. This is Max Verstappen's numbers, so this is the Verstappen line, and he's still been winning races, he's still been putting up loads of points, but we know that Max is effectively going to maximise whatever car is available for him. This is Sergio Perez's line, and well, you can see the decline has been major since Miami. Maybe it's better to look at it from this perspective, right? So this is points scored per weekend on statsf1.com. Really, you're looking here from the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix onwards, right? So they had 6 rounds, and then since then we've had now 7 more rounds from, so 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and now round 13 in Hungary. So let's just look halfway through the season, right? Because they went to Imola. Red Bull actually brought an upgrade to Imola that they said was going to be quite significant, but didn't really do much. Verstappen that weekend still won the race, but in the final stint, Norris was the faster driver, but overtaking around Imola just isn't going to happen. But Perez that weekend scored 4 points. And I just wanted to look at this, right, because this is, of course, including sprint weekends, but Perez's points, because I think Perez is the driver that really shows where the Red Bull is as a car, because if Perez is in a rocket ship, respectfully, he's probably going to come second or third or have a good weekend. And we saw that at the start of the season. Perez was second to Max in Saudi Arabia. Not the best Australian Grand Prix, but he bounced back well in Japan, bounced back well in China, had a perfectly acceptable weekend in Miami as well. But since then, 18-18, 10-18, 21-18. Since then, 4-0-0, 4-7-0-6. That's halfway through the season. Perez's performance overnight collapsed. Now, you can argue why Perez's performance has completely disappeared, and obviously the same is true for Max on some level. He's still been in the fight for winning races, and obviously Monaco wasn't great. He still won a couple, but arguably Canada, he maybe shouldn't have won the safety car stuff. Spain, Norris obviously off the line, was the faster car on track, but Verstappen still won. But and then since then, he's not won now, Max, 3 races in a row, which is unheard of, right? The last time Max didn't win for 3 races in a row was back in 2021. It's literally been 3 years since that's happened for Max. And Perez's performance have disappeared. So either you think, all right, that's Perez, European stint and the car upgrades he struggled with or whatever, or you buy into the idea that something happened between Miami and Imola where their car literally disappeared overnight. Because I just wanted to take you guys back to China, where it's not that long ago. This race is not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. It was round 5 of this season, and Max was so much faster than literally anyone by a mile. The sprint race was a joke, frankly, and this was the main Grand Prix when these are the pace numbers. So this is Norris, who was averaging a 140.6 during the Grand Prix. Verstappen on a 2-stop, so probably, going to be slightly faster, but he was on a 139.7. And literally a second a lap faster, right? This was the pace advantage of the Red Bull at that Grand Prix. It was unbelievable how fast it was. And after that race, I was convinced that nobody was taking another pole position, but Max this year, probably, he was going to win every single Grand Prix. It looked insanely ominous. But at that point, things very quickly have made this season the best season since 2021. And now we're getting moments like this where Max Verstappen doesn't like the upgrades on the car. He's obviously colliding with Lewis Hamilton this weekend, finishes 5th in the Grand Prix after a difficult day, getting frustrated with the team on the radio. So what do you guys make of this in the comment section below? Because you look at the way the season started, and obviously you look at last season as well, because last year, Red Bull won basically every single race completely effortlessly. And you can argue that it was because the other teams dropped the ball, and I think that's probably fair in part that, Mercedes and Ferrari didn't deliver in 2023, really. But if you do buy into the idea that this Red Bull car has some elements of it which were deemed to be illegal, and maybe, whether Red Bull intended to bend or break the rules or not, that's of course another debate. But if that is true, it certainly would explain what has happened, right? And, we don't know if it's true or not, but it would explain the reason why halfway through this season, potentially words were had behind the scenes, and all of a sudden we have like an unbelievably competitive racing season where every weekend who knows what's going to happen. But, if there's more rumors on this, and I don't imagine this is the last we're going to hear about this, to be perfectly honest, but if it's not, it does call into question what's happened the last couple of years. Like, are these illegal elements, if that's true, that have been removed from the RB20, were they on the RB19, right? Is that one of the reasons why that RB19 had just an absurd pace advantage last season? And, is this one of the reasons why Sergio Perez's future looks to be absolutely set, and all of a sudden is now like he's going to be kicked out of the car because they feel like they need someone more competitive in there if they actually want to hold on to this year's Constructors' Championship? And it does remind me somewhat of what happened at Spa 2 years ago. You guys remember 2022, Max started P14 and won the race by like an absolute mile. Like, it wasn't even close. He was P14 to P1 very quickly indeed. He of course took a grid penalty, and this may well happen again this year. Max is likely going to need a new engine. He'll probably take it in Spa, so he's probably going to start quite a way down the order. The last 2 years, he's won here effortlessly, as I said. And it will raise questions if he doesn't win effortlessly this year again and make clear progress in the field as to whether there is more to the decline of this car than initially might be expected, right? And it is interesting that Red Bull were apparently speaking to the FIA themselves about McLaren potentially trying to cheat and using like extra air ducts in the front brakes they weren't meant to be doing. And then the FIA were like, no, it looks like McLaren are doing this okay. But just interesting that, if Red Bull were talking to the FIA to say, hey, we think McLaren are doing something dodgy, like, does that imply, maybe it doesn't, but does that imply that they might have had similar questions from other teams? Frankly, I don't really know, but that's where we're going to leave it for today. Fascinated to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, whether you think there's any truth to this rumor, and if there is some truth, what it would mean for even, you can argue, the legitimacy of what we have seen in this sport over the last couple of seasons. But yeah, we may have unveiled or unearthed something rather serious behind the scenes of this sport, and there's always things going on behind the scenes of this sport. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.